Following the American Revolution, the United States faced an uncertain future. How would this brand new nation govern itself? What challenges would it face? And most importantly, how did the decisions made in this delicate era of American history shape the country we live in today? Welcome to our breakdown of Chapter 6 of the American YOP, New Nation, where we discuss the importance of this transformative period in our nation's history and the formation of its constitution.
The early struggles of the United States, from Shays' Rebellion to the election of 1800. After 8 years of bloodshed, the war for independence had finally been won, but the battle for the nation's stability was just beginning. The Articles of Confederation was America's first attempt at government, but proved too weak to hold the new country together through its delicate early years. With no power to levy taxes and no strong central authority, the new government struggled to maintain order. Many states in the new nation found themselves in debt accumulated throughout war, and with no help from the central government absorbed state debt, soldiers were denied wages. In 1786, tensions built in the states of Massachusetts, in which farmers who were already struggling to make ends meet and who hoped the state would protect them from creditors were now under threats of foreclosures. As the state sided with their lenders only 3 years after the war ended, there were already the threat of an uprising. Farmers and unpaid soldiers were outraged. To them was completely injustice. They had fought and risked their lives for the hope of a better nation, a nation that was failing them. Daniel Shay, a former captain of the Continental Army, led the disgruntled farmers and former soldiers on a violent attacks on courthouses, occupying and forming blockades around several of them, preventing further tax collection and keeping judges from issuing foreclosure orders. This became known as Shays' Rebellion. The rebellion short-lived, however, as Governor Bowdoin in the Massachusetts hired an army led by Benjamin Lincoln. The quell of the insurrection, Lincoln met the rebels in the Springfield after they had made a failed attempt to capture Federal Armory. Just like that, the rebellion was over. There was a dispute over proper punishment for the people of Shays' Rebellion. Several were hung, but James Madison and others believed that such punishments might only ignite more protest. And so the majority of the Shaysites and Shay himself were granted pardons. Although it met a quick end, the rebellion was eye-opening. Some of Thomas Jefferson's believed the rebellion was nothing more than growing pains of the new nation, but nationalists such as James Madison saw the rebellion as proof of nation's shortcomings.
In 1786, the Annapolis Convention was held to discuss economic issues and interstate trade. However, the turnout was very poor, with only 5 states sending delegates. Despite this, Madison's push for constitutional reforms continued, and Shays' Rebellion convinced leaders to act. This culminated in the more successful Constitutional Convention of 1787, held at Independence Hall, Philadelphia. Representatives from 12 of the 13 states gathered to revise the Articles of Confederation, with Rhode Island being the only state absent. The intention of the convention was initially to revise the Articles of Confederation, but Madison's proposal for the Virginia Plan shifted the focus towards the creation of an entirely new framework of government. His plan, which included a strong central government with 3 branches, executive, legislative, and judicial, sparked intense debate, particularly around issues of representation and slavery. Much of the conflict was between large and small states. The Virginia Plan called for population proportional representation in both houses of the legislature, which favored larger states. Smaller states, fearing their interests would be overlooked, countered with the New Jersey Plan. This plan proposed equal representation for all states, regardless of size. This disagreement led to the Great Compromise, which established a bicameral legislature. In this system, the House of Representatives would reflect population size, giving larger states more power, while the Senate would provide equal representation to all states, regardless of size. The issue of slavery also created significant tensions. The South wanted slaves to be counted in their population, while many northern states, which were moving towards abolition, felt this would give the South undue power in Congress. The solution was the Three-Fifths Compromise, which counted 3/5 of the slave population.
After much debate and many compromises, a new proposed constitution was drafted, depicting a government unlike any other. The new constitution still needed to be ratified, however, and was sent to Congress along with a cover letter from George Washington. Critics of the Constitution worked hard to persuade citizens against its ratifications. One of their major points of contention was the rejection of a proposal by George Mason, the author of Virginia's Declaration of Rights. Anti-Federalists argued that an explicit guarantee of individual rights was essential to protect citizens from potential overreach by the federal government. On the other hand, Federalists in favor of ratification believed that adding such a list of rights would be unnecessary and could potentially limit future freedoms. The Federalist Papers were a crucial series of writings published in New York papers. They featured compelling arguments from some of the most prominent figures of the time, including Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. These essays were designed to address concerns about the proposed Constitution and defend its principles. They sought to reassure both the public and state legislators that a strong central government would not lead to tyranny, but would instead provide stability. In early 1788, voting took place in Massachusetts, where delegates narrowly approved the Constitution. However, they also insisted on adding their own amendments, fearing the potential for government overreach. This pattern of close votes and additional amendments continued in other state conventions across this country. As each state debated the document, the issue of personal rights and limits on government power remained a strong talking point. Finally, on July 2, 1788, the Constitution was ratified, securing the framework for the new government.
The election of George Washington as the first president solidified the Constitution's legitimacy and marked the beginning of a new era in American governance. However, in response to ongoing demands for protections against government power, a total of 10 amendments were added to the Constitution in 1791, known as the Bill of Rights. These amendments, though highly controversial at the time, are now viewed as an irreplaceable cornerstone of American democracy. They guarantee essential freedoms such as the freedom of speech, religion, and the press, and provide protection against government abuse. With the Constitution in place, the first test of this new government came under President George Washington. His leadership helped set many precedents, from the two-term tradition to the formation of a cabinet. However, political divisions soon emerged. Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, favored a strong central government, while anti-Federalists, led by Thomas Jefferson, pushed for states' rights. Thomas Jefferson was for the masses and was against an elite centralized government. He wanted a small militia and to reduce government size. But the Founding Fathers saw pure democracy as dangerous. These conflicts laid the foundation for America's political party system.
Soon the nation yet again faced resistance. The Whiskey Rebellion of 1794 was sparked by the imposition of high taxes on whiskey, which deeply affected Western farmers. Many of whom relied on distilling whiskey as a vital part of their livelihoods. This tax was part of the broader effort by a federal government to generate revenue and stabilize the nation's finances. But for many farmers in the frontier regions, the tax felt like an unfair burden, leading to widespread protests, ultimately opening defiance against the government's authority. This tested the strengths of federal government. President George Washington quickly mobilized a militia to quell the insurrection. This proved the nation's ability to enforce laws and protect order. Meanwhile, conflicts with Native American nations over the land expansion continued, highlighting the darker consequences of American independence. Abroad tensions with Britain and France during the French Revolution and aftermath of the XYZ affair, but the young country in a difficult position, forcing early leaders to navigate foreign policy very carefully. The election of 1800 marked a defining moment in American history. It was the first peaceful transfer of power between political parties in the United States, from Federalist John Adams to Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson. At the time, the idea that a nation could shift leadership without a bloodshed was revolutionary. Many feared that the change might lead to a violence or even a civil war. Instead, it set a lasting example of democratic values, showing the world that elections could truly reflect the will of people and function without force. Once in office, President Jefferson worked to reshape the government according to his republican ideals. He believed in a limited federal government and sought to reduce its size influence. On one of his first major actions was cutting the size of the standing army to about 3,000 troops, reflecting his beliefs in state rights and a more restrained federal military presence. During his presidency, Jefferson also faced challenges related to Haitian Revolution. The successful slave revolt in Haiti not only weakened the French power in the Americas, but also raised fears similar uprising in the American South where slavery was deeply rooted.
One of Jefferson's most significant accomplishments was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. By buying the vast territory from France, he doubled the size of the United States and opened the door for westward expansion. Though Jefferson had long promoted a strict interpretation of the Constitution, this purchase challenged those beliefs since the Constitution didn't specifically authorize the federal government to acquire new land. Still, the benefits of the deal made it a landmark moment in America's growth. Later in his presidency, Jefferson passed the Embargo Act of 1807, hoping to pressure Britain and France to respect American neutrality by stopping all trade with foreign nations. However, the act backfired, hurting the U.S. economy more than it affected European powers. The continued tension, especially with Britain, eventually led to the War of 1812, though often seen as a conflict with unclear goals and mixed results. It stirred a wave of national pride and unity that shaped the country's identity moving forward. In the end, Jefferson's presidency was full of major events, both positive and controversial, that shaped the early path of the United States, from peaceful political transition to bold land expansion and economic challenges. His time in office reflected the growing pains of a new nation.
Despite the challenges faced during these formative years, the early leaders of the United States remained committed to the core values that they had fought for during the War of Independence. Values of freedom, self-governance, and equality guided their decisions as they worked to create a system of government that would endure for generations. The first few decades of the nation were critical in shaping the United States into the country we recognize today. Among the most significant achievements was drafting the Constitution, a foundational document created from intense political debates, deep disagreements over power structure, and necessary compromises. This established the framework of the nation's government. It was a bold experiment in democracy, blending ideals of liberty with the practicalities of governing a diverse and expanding republic. This process of negotiation led to a system that was unlike any other, one that balanced federal power with individual rights and set up a government that could adapt to future changes. The lessons learned during the political period still echo in modern debates on governance, the role of federal government, and the protection of individual rights. Understanding the challenges, ideals, and debates of this early era is crucial to understanding the political dynamics of the United States today, proving that understanding history is key to understanding today.